As our life began a new chapter in Tennessee, the weight of transition pressed heavily on my shoulders. We had barely stepped off one uncertain path before stepping into another. The first urgent task was clear: find a roof to sleep under, a door to close behind us, and somewhere, anywhere, that the children could lay their heads without fear. I had a lead, a place tucked into the corners of memory, but with that knowledge came a knot of unease. The real question wasn't just where, it was who. Who would be waiting on the other side of that door? Were they friends, strangers, or something worse? I couldn't silence the gnawing fear that we might be walking into danger, or worse, dragging the children into it. I'd already made that mistake once. Never again. When the bus finally groaned to a halt, we found ourselves in front of a gas station that looked like it had long since given up. Its signage hung askew, sun-bleached and clinging to rusted chains. We stepped off the bus into air heavy with humidity and tension. The scent of motor oil and wilted roadside weeds clung to the breeze. Every step felt hollow, the crunch of gravel underfoot oddly loud in the quiet, desolate surroundings. Near the entrance, a payphone stood like a ghost from another era. It leaned slightly, as if even it was tired, barely holding itself together. Its buttons were faded, its receiver dangling by a frayed cord. Timothy caught my eye, questioning, and I gave a slight nod. He stepped toward it with hesitation, and I followed close behind, my nerves frayed like the phone's cable. He picked up the receiver, fingers pausing above the keypad. The number he dialed wasn't his. It had never been his to remember. It was mine. A number I had tucked away in the back of my mind for years, unsure if I'd ever use it again. The line rang, and rang. Each tone felt like it was chiseling into the silence that surrounded us, stretching time thin with anxiety. My heart beat louder than the dial tone, each unanswered ring echoing in my chest. Then, finally, the line cracked, like a lightning bolt in a still sky. On the other end came a burst of sound, shouting, cheering, the unmistakable swell of many voices clashing at once. It was disorienting, like trying to hear through a windstorm. "Hello," Timothy said, raising his voice to be heard. There was a pause, and then a voice emerged. Rough, gravelly, worn down not by age, but by life. "Yeah, who is this?" the man asked, not warmly, not threateningly either, but somewhere in that unsettling in-between. Timothy looked over at me, the question in his eyes silent but clear. I met his gaze and said with steady resolve, "Tell him it's Eden." He relayed the name. Silence fell on the line, heavy and full of unspoken recognition. The static hung between us like fog, and I felt my breath catch. Then, the voice came back, flat, unreadable, 2372 West Road, a click, then nothing. The dial tone returned, cold and indifferent. Timothy slowly lowered the receiver, staring at it as if it might offer more. But it was done. He said an address. "That's about it," he muttered, turning to me with furrowed brows, his concern showing through the cracks in his composure. I glanced toward the sky, where the sun was already melting into the horizon, bleeding orange and purple across the clouds. Night wasn't far off. "I know the address already," I said. I tried to make the word sound certain, grounded, as if that knowledge alone was enough to reassure both of us. But inside, I felt the pull of old memories, ones I wasn't sure I was ready to revisit. The bus remained parked on the shoulder of the quiet road, its engine ticking as it cooled in the soft Tennessee dusk. The air inside was hushed, heavy with unspoken thoughts and the lull of travel fatigue. Toward the back, Grace and Chris sat side by side, their worlds orbiting quietly but separately. Grace had her knees tucked up beneath her, a paperback balanced in one hand. Her eyes moved quickly across the lines, but it was clear she wasn't really absorbing the words. It was more of a comfort, an old habit. Across from her, Chris leaned his forehead lightly against the windowpane, his breath fogging a soft circle on the glass. Outside, the landscape rolled by in streaks of orange and purple, the horizon stretching far and wide, offering both freedom and distance. He turned toward her suddenly, his posture stiffening as if he had just remembered something urgent, then relaxed a bit, unsure. His voice was low when he finally spoke, laced with uncertainty. "What was Catapino like for you?" he asked, his fingers fiddling with the frayed seam of his sleeve. "I never actually got to see it. Never got the chance to experience it." Grace blinked slowly and looked up, slipping a piece of paper between the pages of her book before setting it down on her lap. She adjusted her glasses before removing them entirely, rubbing a spot behind her ear where the frames had pressed too tightly. It was tough, she began, her voice tinged with quiet nostalgia, but beautiful, in strange, hidden places. Her eyes drifted past Chris, remembering. There was this marine river that flowed right through the city, clear, blue, almost unnaturally so. I used to sneak down to the riverbank just to watch the reflections of the buildings in the water. It made everything look softer, like the world forgot how hard it had been the night before. She paused, studying him with sudden curiosity. Wait, I thought you were from there. Chris let out a half laugh, the sound brittle around the edges. He shook his head. Not really, he said, voice lowering. I'm not from the city. I'm from the sun. Grace's brow furrowed slightly, her head tilting. Chris continued, his gaze now distant, as though the answer was lodged deep in memory. That's where I was raised, sort of. My father. Well, when he first saw me, he was told I'd one day be his undoing. Some prophecy, you know the type, overblown, cryptic. So he threw me into the sun. Grace's breath hitched slightly, but she didn't interrupt. He thought it would kill me, Chris said softly. But it didn't. I didn't burn. Somehow. I bonded with it. And it bonded with me. The sun became my shield, my home. I survived because others, people I barely knew, sacrificed themselves to protect me. Grace leaned in, shifting her weight so she was fully facing him now. There was something gentle in her expression, something that made room for his grief. You don't have to feel guilty about your father, she said. He was a bad man. He annihilated an entire race of people. They both laughed quietly at the gravity of the truth, the kind of bitter humor that only survivors share. Chris nodded, his smile fading into something more somber. I know. But I still wish I could have seen him. This man, everyone calls a monster. I want to understand who he really was, before I ended it. Not just the nightmare version they all feared. Just the man. Grace rested her hand gently on his shoulder, her touch grounding. Your whole life, you're told you'll have to face him, she said. But no one prepares you for the hollow that follows. Chris stared at his hands. I wish I could have known what my mother saw in him. What made her stay, or fall in love with him at all. Because maybe then I'd understand her. Understand myself. But now. His words dissolved into silence. Without a word, Grace slipped one arm around him in a side hug, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. Even the devil needs love sometimes, she murmured, almost to herself. Then, lifting her head, she added, sometimes it's not about love. It's about being bound, anchored to someone. Maybe not by choice, but by gravity. And people. They pour everything into those bonds. She reached up and wiped a tear that had begun to streak down Chris's cheek. But people can find their way back, she whispered. Even after everything. Chris chuckled through his tears, but it was a soft, aching sound. I want to speak to them. The confession hovered between them, open and raw. Grace didn't respond at first. She held him a little tighter, suddenly lost in her own reflection. The words stirred something in her, a mirror of her own longing. Her mind drifted to the people she had left behind. Her mother, sharp-tongued and soft-hearted in moments that mattered. Her stepbrother, quiet and strange but fiercely loyal. Her friends who had walked with her through both the light and the ash. And the blue roses, an image etched in her soul, beautiful but sorrowful, reminders of a past she couldn't carry forever. She knew that she, too, would eventually have to move on from the weight of her old world. That to truly grow, she'd have to let go of what once was. And in that moment, she silently wished that Chris could one day do the same. As Grace opened her eyes, returning to the present, she noticed Timothy and me standing just a few feet away. We hadn't said a word, but something about our presence felt almost ceremonial, like witnesses to a moment that didn't ask for commentary, just reverence. And watching Grace comfort him, I felt a knot form in my throat. She carried so much, guidance, care, warmth. She protected these boys the way I try to. But then a realization pierced through me. No one was protecting her. Not even me. Not yet. When the bus driver finally climbed aboard and gave a curt nod, we hurriedly wiped our tears, pulling ourselves back together. The vehicle hissed and jerked forward, wheels crunching along the worn road as we continued on. Soon enough, the familiar drone of the engine was replaced by the rustling of wind and the soft thud of our footsteps. We had arrived, though arrival felt more like a question than a declaration. The sign read "Welcome to Adams," a small, sun-baked town nestled in the folds of Tennessee. The sky above us was vast and orange, the sun blazing down with relentless intensity. Its heat pressed against our backs like a weight, soaking our shirts and making the air shimmer around us. Dust clung to our shoes and ankles with every step, and the surrounding buildings, modest, peeling, and weary, seemed to wilt beneath the same sun. We walked for nearly an hour, the town's quiet streets offering little in the way of guidance. Sparse stores sat closed or abandoned. The only sounds were the buzz of insects and the occasional bark of a faraway dog. It didn't take long for fatigue to set in. "Why is the sun so hot?" Chris groaned, dragging his feet behind him like he was stuck in the Iron Maiden. I turned back to glance at the group. Each of them had slipped into their own state of quiet suffering. Grace was flapping her arms, smacking away at the persistent swarm of mosquitoes nipping at her skin, her once pristine glasses sliding down her nose. Her ponytail had come loose, damp strands clinging to her forehead. Chris looked like a man on the verge of combustion. His cheeks were flushed, sweat dripping down his jaw like melting wax. He tugged at his collar with frustration, like the fabric itself offended him. Timothy, meanwhile, had turned his attention completely to the map in his hands. He flipped it around again and again, squinting at the lines and landmarks, muttering under his breath. "Eden, I don't want to be a jerk or nothing," he finally said, "but I really don't think we're going the right way." Chris and Grace turned to look at us, the heat making their expressions sharp with irritation. I stopped and stood firm, my tone unwavering. "We are going the right way. I've walked this path many times." There was silence for a beat, skepticism hanging in the air, but eventually, they fell back in step behind me. The sound of our collective trudging resumed, slower now, heavier. As we pushed deeper into the heart of town, the landscape began to change. More buildings appeared, some still alive with flickering neon signs, others long abandoned. It was then that I saw it, a bar, squat and unimpressive, nestled between a boarded-up bakery and a rusted mechanic shop. I stopped. My eyes fixed on the bar's warped wooden sign, the faded letters barely clinging to the paint. The structure looked like it could collapse if someone breathed too hard. But I knew the place. More than that, I felt it. I turned to the others with a smile that tried to mask the knot in my stomach. They didn't smile back. I could see it in their faces, the subtle shift, the quiet calculation. Chris looked ready to melt into the sidewalk. Grace paused mid-swat at a fly. Timothy stared at the bar with suspicion, still clutching the map like a lifeline. "We're here," I said softly. "Finally," Chris muttered, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand, the sweat rolling down his face like he'd just stepped out of a downpour. We made our way to the front. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as it swayed lazily on its hinges, like it couldn't decide whether to welcome us or warn us away. I stopped in front of it, watching it swing back and forth, back and forth. My hand hovered near the knob, but I didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring at it like it might open on its own. And, in a way, it did. Timothy broke the silence. "Are you gonna open it?" I glanced back at him, but said nothing. Then, slowly, I turned back to the door just as it began to move again. But this time, it didn't just sway. It creaked wide open, deliberate and slow. And standing there in the doorway, framed by the dim golden light inside, was a face I hadn't seen in years. "Marilyn," I breathed. Behind me, the others stiffened. I could feel it. Their breath caught, their muscles tensed. They all knew the name. They'd heard stories, my stories. The tales of betrayal, manipulation, and the part he played in my undoing. In our family's collapse. And yet there he stood, tall, smiling, alive. Marilyn, my brother. He flashed that same boyish, devil-may-care grin he'd always worn like armor. A grin that never quite reached his eyes. He stepped aside, one arm sweeping theatrically toward the interior. "Well, don't just stand there like I'm a ghost," he said. "Come on in." Reluctantly, we crossed the threshold. And what we saw shattered every expectation. From the outside, it had looked like a neglected shed. But inside, the bar pulsed with energy. Warm lights twinkled from lanterns strung across the ceiling. People laughed and shouted over clinking glasses and swirling jazz. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickers of gold against the walls. It was a place full of life, color, and movement, an impossible contrast to the grey, crumbling town outside. "You're doing well, aren't you, Marilyn?" I said, my voice edged with sarcasm. He swept past me, arms raised dramatically. "Welcome to my humble empire," he declared. "I bought it just to be closer to you-know-who." He wagged a finger at me, grinning like a cat with a secret. Grace stepped forward, her brows pinched. "When did you two make up?" she asked, suspicion coloring her voice. Marilyn's expression shifted. He stepped closer to her, leaned in with a mocking kind of gentleness. He traced a finger lightly along her cheek, eyes glinting. "Hexa's child," he said softly, studying her. "I expected more from you." Then he turned on his heel and strode to the bar, leaving confusion trailing in his wake like smoke. The air shifted. Everyone was trying to make sense of what they'd just seen, what he meant, what he didn't mean. The lines blurred between old wounds and new mysteries. I watched him, still trying to reconcile the boy I once knew with the man who now moved so freely in his own world of contradictions. His coat was long, brown, and weather-worn, but the real show was at his feet. Bright pink bunny slippers, absurd and unapologetic. His shirt and pants were smeared with grease, yet he carried himself like royalty, chaotic, unpredictable royalty. Without warning, he turned, snatched a drink from behind the bar, and walked straight to me. Grinning, he took my hand and yanked me toward the floor, the music around us bursting into a lively swing. "Come now, brother," he laughed, spinning me once beneath the lanterns. "What's family without a little dance?" As we moved, Chris, Grace, and Timothy remained near the door, still unsure. The music throbbed around us. The bar glittered with contradictions. And for the first time in years, I was back in the orbit of the brother who had once nearly ruined me. And yet, part of me still wanted to follow him into the music. Chris was the first to peel away from the group, the lure of music and the undulating crowd drawing him in like a siren's call. His expression was unreadable, calm on the surface, but something about the way his shoulders tightened as he slipped through the mass of dancing bodies betrayed an unease beneath. The venue throbbed with life, a living organism made of laughter, music, and footsteps, and soon he was swallowed whole by it. Grace's gaze followed him, her brows knitting with concern. The strobe lights caught in her lenses, turning her eyes into twin flashes of doubt. "Where are you going?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the blare of bass and brass. Chris half-turned, his voice casual, almost too casual. "Restroom," he said with a shrug, before vanishing beyond the blur of moving bodies and neon haze. Timothy remained close beside Grace, his hand finding hers in a quiet gesture that said more than words could. He was always this way, quietly attentive, the one to hold a kite string when the storm rolled in. His touch was warm, steady, grounding. "They'll be fine," he murmured, offering her the comfort of certainty. A soft, involuntary blush bloomed across Grace's cheeks, subtle but there, her heart catching up to her feet for a moment. "Yeah," she nodded, releasing a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "But I need to use the restroom too." Reluctantly, she let go of his hand, like releasing a lifeline into a sea she didn't quite trust, and made her way through the crowd toward the back of the venue, where a flickering sign marked women's in half-lit neon. The door was old, its brass handle warm under her hand, the surface chipped and bearing the marks of too many hurried pushes. As she stepped inside, the overhead fluorescent lights stuttered ominously, dimming before flaring back to life with a low hum. Shadows flickered along the tile walls like fleeting phantoms. The contrast between the vibrant energy of the bar and the cold sterility of the restroom was jarring, like slipping into a dream you weren't ready for. Grace moved quickly, brushing past the sinks and slipping into a stall. The door creaked shut, and she clicked the lock into place. It was quiet, too quiet. The muffled bass from the music outside had all but vanished, replaced by an unnatural stillness that pressed against her ears like cotton. As she adjusted herself, she heard it, footsteps. They were slow, measured, and heavy, each one deliberate. Her blood turned cold. The steps didn't sound like the shuffle of another woman's heels. They were too loud, too sure, masculine. Then the door opened with a faint squeal. She froze, lifting her feet and balancing them silently atop the toilet seat, holding her breath. The footsteps continued inside. 1, 2, 3. They stopped just outside her stall. A suffocating pause. And then, silence. She could feel him, whoever he was, standing there, listening, watching. The minutes dragged into eternities. She clenched her jaw to keep from gasping. Then a voice slithered under the stall, low and rasping, like something crawling through gravel. "The Father of Black is coming for you. The Father of Black is coming for you." The words hissed into her ears, repeated like an incantation. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her body instinctively shrinking into itself. The voice was mechanical in its repetition, devoid of emotion but full of menace. Suddenly, fists pounded on the stall door. Bang, bang, bang. The sound reverberated through the room like gunshots. The metal walls shook. Grace clenched her fists and bit down on a scream, her breath shallow, eyes wide and unblinking. And then, nothing. The banging stopped. The presence vanished. No footsteps leaving. No sound at all. Just absence. With adrenaline pulsing through her limbs, she burst out of the stall, her instinct screaming to confront whatever had just happened. But when she flung the door open, the room was empty. The mirrors reflected only her own pale, shaken face. The sinks were dry. The stalls stood open and uninhabited. Not a single sign remained. She stood there for a moment, rooted in place by disbelief. She scanned every corner, bent down, checked under the stalls. Nothing. Then, from the hallway, the clamor of the bar began to bleed back into her awareness. Laughter, music, voices. Was it real? As she slowly pushed the door open and stepped back out into the light and sound, she was met by the familiar figure of Timothy, standing just outside. His silhouette was outlined by the garish glow of a neon sign advertising arcade games and discounted cocktails. His face lit up when he saw her. "I just saw this really cool game they've got over there," he exclaimed, eyes gleaming, utterly unaware of the shadow she had just escaped. Grace blinked, her vision still adjusting, her body still humming with the echo of fear. She forced a smile, the kind that almost reached her eyes. "Yeah," she said, voice light but brittle. Then, with a quick motion, she nudged him in the ribs with her elbow, a playful gesture, masking the residual tremble in her hands. She walked beside him, letting the warmth of his presence slowly thaw the ice clinging to her spine. Her thoughts still circled the stall, the voice, the chilling message. But for now, she chose not to speak of it. She walked toward the game, toward the lights, toward the noise, hoping, maybe foolishly, the distraction could exorcise whatever had just tried to reach her in the dark. Chris stood in the men's restroom, his hands submerged in warm water that gurgled softly from the faucet. He scrubbed his palms in slow, distracted circles, watching rivulets of soap slide down the porcelain sink. The mirror in front of him offered a pale reflection, his eyes dulled, thoughts distant. The air was sterile, heavy with the tang of bleach and something faintly metallic, like old blood. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed with an anxious hum, flickering every so often as if warning of something just beneath the surface of reality. Then, from the far stall, came a violent sound, retching. It wasn't subtle or routine. It tore through the silence like claws against tile. Wet, heaving, relentless. A second bout came, more guttural than the last, followed by an awful choking sound, then a thud like someone collapsing against the stall wall. Chris stiffened. He turned his head slightly toward the sound, but didn't move. His jaw clenched as he tried to ignore it, to pretend it was just some drunk guy who had one too many. But the noises didn't fade. They grew more erratic, groans laced with words he couldn't quite catch. Slurred, murmured, mournful. He sighed and finally raised his voice. "Hey! You okay in there?" A moment of silence. Then, a sound, not a word, but a wheeze, like a man trying to speak with lungs full of smoke. Chris turned off the faucet. Water stopped midstream, the sudden silence now amplifying every strange sound in the room. The door to the stall creaked open with an eerie slowness. A man stumbled out. At first glance, he looked like he might just be drunk. But Chris's eyes widened the moment they caught the stranger's face. The man moved like his bones didn't quite fit his body. He swayed with each step, loose-limbed and strangely elegant, like a marionette half-freed from its strings. His eyes were the first detail that locked Chris in place, swirling with sickly green and burnt orange, like storms caught in a whirlpool of dark blue ink. They shimmered unnaturally, catching the fluorescent light and reflecting it back in jagged patterns across the bathroom wall. His skin was a deep, silky brown, smooth but almost waxy under the lights, like melted candle wax. His long, tangled white hair framed his face like ceremonial drapery, clinging to his shoulders in wet, spidery strands. There was a ghostly elegance to him, an ethereal beauty that veered too far from human to be comforting. His face looked sculpted from marble, the features almost too symmetrical, like something born of obsession rather than nature. "Can you take me to my car?" he slurred, swaying on his feet. His breath hit Chris's nose like sour wine and copper. Chris instinctively took a step back. "Seriously," he muttered, but something, curiosity, maybe something deeper, compelled him forward. He took the man's arm, surprised at the unnatural heat of his skin. It wasn't the warmth of fever or exertion. It was internal, pulsing, like there was a furnace inside him. They stepped out of the restroom into the night air. The sky above the parking lot was moonless, choked with clouds. The wind had gone still. The music from inside the bar was strangely muted now, like it was coming from underwater. Chris glanced around. No Timothy, no Grace, no Eden. Just empty cars, shadows, and a growing feeling of disconnection from the world he knew. "Right here," the man murmured, leading him to a sleek, obsidian car parked at the far edge of the lot. The car was too clean, too perfect. Its surface gleamed, but not from polish. It looked like it had been carved from onyx. The windows were so deeply tinted they reflected nothing. No stars, no streetlights, not even the man standing in front of them. He clicked a key fob, and the car emitted a soft chirrup, followed by a low mechanical purr that sent a chill down Chris's spine. Chris moved to open the door, but the man waved him off. "No, no. I can't drive. You have to." He grinned, eyes half-lidded with something that wasn't just intoxication. Reluctantly, Chris slid into the driver's seat. The cabin smelled faintly of incense and scorched fabric. The dashboard was a sea of symbols and buttons, none of them labeled. Strange lights pulsed rhythmically across the panels, like the heartbeat of a creature pretending to be a machine. "Where are we going?" Chris asked cautiously, looking over at him. The man giggled, leaned forward, and without warning, pressed a red button that glowed like a coal beside the gearshift. In an instant, reality collapsed. The parking lot disintegrated around them into shadow. Chris was no longer sitting in a car, he was floating. Or falling. He couldn't tell. The world became a smear of black, grey, and flickering violet. Then, with a sickening snap, the car was falling, plummeting through a sky roiling with clouds blacker than ink, alive with lightning that danced horizontally across the heavens. Chris screamed, but the wind tore the sound from his mouth. The car spun, twisted. The dashboard lights flickered erratically. Through the windshield, the ground came rushing up like the surface of an alien moon. The crash was deafening. The world exploded in fire and metal and screaming earth. The impact tossed Chris forward, but something invisible held him in place. Everything around him warped, bent inward, then burst into flame. When the smoke began to clear, Chris coughed and sat up, blinking through the ash. He was alive. Not a scratch. Beside him, the man lay twisted in a grotesque heap, his skin blackened and peeling, his face melted beyond recognition, but those eyes. They still glowed, faint and pulsing like dying stars. Chris stumbled from the wreckage and looked around. This wasn't the parking lot. This wasn't even the world he knew. The forest was utterly black. Not just dark, burned. Trees stood like charred bones. The grass was grey, crumbling beneath his feet like ash. The sky overhead churned like thick smoke, thunder rolling with no lightning to follow. The air was silent. No birds. No breeze. Just an overwhelming emptiness. "Hello!" Chris shouted, panic rising in his throat. "Help! Is anyone?" His voice echoed, warped, and faded into the nothingness. Then, softly, no louder than a whisper breathing against the back of his neck, "You should not be here, child of the sun." Chris whirled around. But the forest stood still. The man's corpse hadn't moved. And yet, something was watching him. Something ancient. And very awake. Chris trudged forward through the dense, shadow-wrapped forest, his breathing shallow, each step calculated and quiet. The trees loomed like skeletal sentinels, their bark ashen and slick, their twisted limbs reaching out like claws trying to ensnare him. The forest floor was soft and damp, a bed of decaying leaves and blackened moss that muffled his footsteps yet sucked at his shoes like it wanted him to sink. A pulse of fear beat in his throat as he realized just how utterly lost he was. The air was thick and still, the silence pressing in on all sides, broken only by the occasional distant groan, too inhuman to be wind. The deeper he ventured, the more it felt like the forest itself was watching him, shifting subtly with each turn to lead him deeper into its belly. Every time he looked behind him, the path he thought he came from had vanished, swallowed by tangled roots and shadow. Time dissolved. It could have been minutes, hours, days. He didn't know anymore. The world had narrowed to his own heartbeat and the creeping sense that he was not alone. Then, a glimmer. A faint, almost imperceptible light flickered in the distance, like the last breath of a candle behind glass. Chris froze. His first instinct was suspicion. This world had already revealed itself as unnatural, but desperation overruled doubt. He moved toward the light, ducking beneath low-hanging branches, stepping over thick coils of roots like sleeping serpents. Each movement was cautious, deliberate. The forest thinned, and with a final push through a thicket of sharp brambles, he broke into open air. The change was staggering. Spread out before him was a massive, alien structure that towered against the horizon. It wasn't just large, it was impossible. Larger than any palace, any fortress, any city he had seen in his waking world. It dwarfed even the mythic grandeur of Rome's ruins. Its walls were a dark, bruised brick, layered as though volcanic ash had hardened over a skeleton of obsidian. The architecture defied consistency. Gothic spires jutted from one end, while brutalist slabs and sleek modern windows clashed together like a collage of civilizations stitched by madness. The most unnerving detail, however, was the door. It stood tall and solitary, deep red and crafted from what looked like living oak, pulsing faintly, as though it had veins hidden within the grain. It wasn't just an entrance. It was an invitation. As Chris approached, the enormity of the place made him feel smaller than a child. An anxious pit formed in his stomach. This could be anything: a house, a temple, a fortress, a prison, or worse, a school. He raised his hand and knocked 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed much too long. A low rumble shivered beneath his feet. He staggered backward, eyes wide as the very structure began to twist. Slowly, impossibly, the entire building rotated, groaning like a mountain waking from slumber. What had once been a flat facade now reshaped itself into a massive cross formation. 4 wings stretching in every direction, like some divine symbol twisted into a mockery. Panicking, Chris turned to flee, only to find the forest behind him had vanished entirely. Just mist. An endless white fog now covered the path from which he came. The only path forward was the structure itself. Then, with a hiss like a whisper cutting through silence, a door on the east wing cracked open. This one was no longer red. It had shifted into a deep, murky green, like the skin of a rotting pear, and it creaked open with agonizing slowness. An invisible force tugged at his chest, beckoning him forward, despite every instinct screaming to run the other way. Chris clenched his fists and stepped over the threshold. Immediately, he was swallowed by grandeur. The interior of the structure was astonishing, opulent, and chilling all at once. Black and gold marble swept across the floor in veins, swirling beneath his feet like a frozen current. Grand staircases branched upward in either direction, lined with golden banisters shaped like writhing serpents. Massive pillars loomed, engraved with arcane symbols that flickered with inner light. The walls glimmered as though polished with glass, and above him hung an immense chandelier, a sprawl of crystal and bone that shimmered with fractured reflections. Yet beneath the splendor, there was something wrong. The hall felt too quiet, too still. Like a museum of the dead. Beauty had been carved into something unnatural, each perfect line hiding a flaw too deep to see. A footstep echoed. From the shadows of the grand staircase, a rotund man emerged. He descended with slow purpose, the hem of his rich velvet robe brushing each stair like a whisper. Sparse hair clung to his head, styled with a strange precision, and a scraggly goatee danced around his lips as he smiled with unsettling calm. In one hand, he held a long cigarette holder, the ember glowing faintly as he took a slow drag. Now, he said, voice smooth as silk, but sharp as glass. Who must you be? Chris hesitated. My name is Chris Blaze, he replied, voice low, dry. The man's smile widened. He exhaled a trail of smoke that curled into a spiral midair. Chris Blaze. Well, it appears your file was right on time. Welcome to Sinner High. The name struck Chris like a bell tolling in his chest. Something ancient and dreadful stirred at the sound of it. Sinner High. It was like a curse wearing the mask of an institution. The words felt older than they should be, steeped in blood, power, and expectation. He glanced around, heart thudding in his chest. The hall suddenly felt tighter, the light dimmer. Sinner High, he echoed, stepping back. What is this place? Why am I here? The man chuckled and descended the last step. Oh, that's not a question I can answer. That's something you'll have to earn. He gestured casually toward the now shut door. You knocked, after all. You were meant to enter. You've been marked, dear boy. Chris bolted toward the door, only to find it sealed. No handles, no seams, no escape. He pounded on it with the flat of his hand, yelling, Eden! Grace! Somebody! His voice bounced back, distorted and mocking. The man behind him lit another cigarette. You'll find them, eventually. Or maybe not. Sinner High takes what it wants. And you, my boy, are very much wanted. Chris backed away, the edges of his vision tunneling with panic. He wasn't just in another place. He was in another realm. And the game had only just begun. I sat hunched over the scratched mahogany bar, the amber glow from a flickering wall sconce bathing the countertop in liquid gold. A dull country tune hummed from a dusty jukebox in the corner, barely cutting through the chatter of late-night patrons and the clink of ice in old glasses. This wasn't the kind of place meant for gods or devils, just men trying to forget they were either. And in that strange, nowhere bar off a nameless road in Tennessee, I sat across from my brother, Marilyn, sharing a drink with a man who had once walked beside me into battle, and who had also walked away. We talked for a while. Light things. Stories from when the stars still whispered to us and the sky felt like home. But the laughter that touched our lips was hollow. Too much had gone unsaid for too long. I watched the way the whiskey caught the light as I swirled it in my glass, the way my reflection bent in the liquid surface. There was a heaviness I could no longer hold in. I set my drink down carefully. The smile faded from my lips like a wave retreating from the shore. I stared into the glass for a long moment, as if it might answer the question I'd carried in my chest for centuries. Then I looked up and asked the one thing that still haunted me. Brother, why did you betray us like that? I've spent countless nights haunted by that moment. The words dropped like stones between us. Marilyn's face hardened. A storm rolled in behind his eyes. He downed his drink in one long, angry swallow and slammed the glass down on the counter with finality. I didn't have a choice, he muttered. It was either my guardhood, or one of you. My blood surged. I slammed my fist down on the bar. The sound cracked through the room like thunder, drawing a few startled glances from the other patrons. I didn't care. I was done pretending. And you chose guardhood over us. I hissed. The betrayal still lived in my voice. I grabbed my drink, hand trembling, and flung it against the far wall. The glass shattered, spraying shards like tiny comets, the alcohol trailing in an arc before splashing down the wall like blood. A silence followed. A heavy one. This, I said through clenched teeth. A bar in the middle of nowhere, in a state you once said didn't deserve a skyline. This is what you bought with your guardhood. Marilyn didn't flinch. If anything, his shoulders slumped further under the weight of memory. I regret it every damn day, Eden, he said, and his voice, for the first time, trembled, not with weakness, but with knowing. But I also learned something in the fallout. The destroyer came to me. The name made the air feel colder. He told me there's a way to fix it. To change everything. Not just between us, everything. I narrowed my eyes. The destroyer deals in chaos, not solutions. What the hell are you talking about? He said there's a power, ancient, older than the stars. Something that will fuse man and God. Permanently. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When it didn't come, I scoffed and leaned back. You mean like some metaphysical unity crap? No, Marilyn said, eyes dead serious. I mean literally. He wants to give humanity the God gene. The words hit me like cold water. I turned back to the bartender and gestured for another drink, more for time than thirst. When it arrived, I cradled the glass in both hands and stared at its contents. That's suicide, I whispered. You and I both know what happens when power like that is handed down to mortals. They are fragile, emotional, short-sighted. They're evolving, Marilyn argued. Maybe faster than we can see. The destroyer believes they're ready. Or if not, they'll have to become ready. And we, he gestured between us, we're not their watchers anymore. I clenched my jaw. The very idea gnawed at something primal in me. I had protected mortals, watched them stumble and grow. But I had also seen them devour their own kind in war, spill blood over envy, pride, and greed. They'll tear themselves apart. Maybe, he said. But they won't need us anymore. No more guardians. No more witches or werewolves or archmages. No more secret worlds. When they become gods, we become obsolete. The air between us thickened with unspoken grief. I turned away from him and looked at the rows of liquor bottles behind the bar. A quiet sadness washed over me. This was the edge of an age. The beginning of a new reckoning. Then let's enjoy this while we still can, I said at last. I raised my glass, my voice low. One last toast for the era of gods. Marilyn smiled faintly and mirrored me, but the smile vanished as quickly as it came. We all do, he murmured, especially the kids. He looked at me, and I knew which name he was about to say before he said it. Timothy. The name hit different now. You and him are bonded, Marilyn said. You know that. Whatever happens to him, happens to you. If he suffers, you suffer. If he dies. He trailed off. I didn't need to hear the rest. I know, I said quietly. He leaned in. Then why let him run around with her? That girl's mother is one of the most powerful witches we've ever recorded. No legacy. No protection. No sense of what she's touching. She's going to ruin him. I'm not Timothy, I said firmly. And I won't make his decisions for him. His path is his own. But his pain is yours. Marilyn's voice was nearly a whisper. You feel what he feels, Eden. That's not a metaphor. That's the bond. And if she breaks him, you will break too. A silence stretched between us. The bartender returned with 2 more drinks. We drank quickly, the burn a poor distraction from the truth now clawing at the edges of my resolve. I could see it, the future. Timothy, full of love, full of hope, raising a child with her, only to be left behind when she chased some calling she couldn't name. Her footsteps would echo down a road he couldn't follow, and the sound of her absence would haunt him forever. He would fade beneath the weight of that loss. And so would I. I took another deep drink. Marilyn slid a small black card across the table, embossed, no name, no symbol, but humming with old magic. A door, or a warning. I took it silently and stepped outside. The air was cool, almost sharp, as I stepped into the night. The stars overhead were pale and distant. The moon, low and bruised, hung like an omen. And in my hand, the card pulsed with quiet power. Behind me, the bar door clicked shut. Ahead of me, a world that was already beginning to change.